What I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes, I am indebted to Dillard Q. Thurman, who is a talented cartoonist and dissident thinker, and someone with whom I have some contact, although just at this point, just casual contact. But Dillard, if that's his real name or not, I'm not even sure. He floated this idea the other day on his Instagram story page, where he discussed something about Sigmund Freud that I had known. I knew about this before, but it took seeing Dillard's discussion of this matter for it to coalesce in my mind and for me to realize something about Freud that had never really struck me before. It was like the pieces coming together in a way that was, when you have that aha moment, that was very, very interesting and exciting in a way to come across. What he said was, and this is true, if you know about Freud and know about his early scholarship, early on in Freud's career, he, for a little while, was a researcher of what he believed to be widespread childhood abuse, and he became someone who was alleging that abuse was, in fact, seemingly endemic among the upper middle class and the upper class, the kind of people who Freud generally was targeting with his research, and the people that basically were his patrons throughout his life. Perhaps not surprisingly, I should say, there was a lot of pushback. People did not want to hear that. This. You could almost call this a proto-pedogate kind of perspective, but the upper middle class in the Victorian age did not want to hear that this was going on, and so this idea, as it were, didn't go anywhere for Freud. Didn't help his career. Now, I'm not one to say that Freud was motivated only by egoism or by a desire to jumpstart his career, to do things, to tell people things that would make them want to buy his books and buy into his shtick, and then, so that he could become the name that he became. It's not for me to say whether Freud was someone who was well-intentioned or ill-intentioned or somewhere in the middle. However, it is interesting that once this early strain of Freudian thought went nowhere, what happened next? Well, what happened next with Freud's thought was he went the very opposite direction. Instead of saying children are being sexually victimized in the Victorian age, in the amongst the Viennese upper classes or wherever, instead of saying that that's going on and that's endemic to the culture in a really disturbing way, he sort of put it in reverse. He did what I'm going to call a Freudian flip, and instead of theorizing that children were being victimized, he started to theorize what we've come to know about Freudian thought now. What comes to your mind when you hear, "Oh, that's so Freudian," right? That children are sexual beings with sexual appetites who secretly desire, sex with their mothers or sex with their fathers, and that this is just this is repressed, and it's only because of a latency period where we block this out of our minds. that we forget that we actually wanted these kinds of things. So, in other words, children went from being victims who were unwilling to be victims, they went from that to being sexual beings just like adults who desired sex just like adults desire sex. And one would think, from what we're told about the Victorian age, one would think that this would be a hugely scandalous and truly unacceptable philosophy, and that it would get roundly rejected, and that Freud would get run out of town on a rail for being a pervert for saying these kinds of things. But that's not what happened, is it? What happened is Freud really caught on with this his Oedipal fantasy scenarios. These notions really caught the imagination of his intended audience, of his would-be patrons, and indeed catapulted him to success. Now that's really counterintuitive in a way, isn't it? You would think that if what we're told about the Victorian age is true, that it was this incredibly, conservative, sexually repressed time period where nobody wanted to talk about, where everybody, reserved sex for marriage, and even then it was not something that one referred to, because it was dirty and it was nasty and so forth. And children definitely needed to be kept protected from it. These are the things that we hear about the Victorian era. If that were so, then Freud Mach 1 would have won out. Freud's initial perspective, Freud's initial philosophy would have won the day. If it came out that children were being victimized, this was, you would think that this would have set off what people call, sometimes rather disingenuously, sometimes ingenuously, I guess, but often disingenuously, they call a moral panic. You would think that the Victorian era would have been ripe for the kind of moral panic, quote unquote, that would have been set off by Freud saying children are being secretly victimized everywhere by adults, by their parents, by high-ranking members of institutions. That this is something that's going on everywhere. You would think that would set off this. You would think that would sell, right? You would think that would have catapulted Freud into success and fame if the Victorian age truly were what they tell us that it was. But instead, people wanted to hear about how children were just miniature adults, and that how they were just as sexual as adults were, and how boys really wanted to get it on with their moms, and girls with their dads, even as young as, what we would think of as the prepubescent years, that they were still sexual, and that it was all just repressed, that they actually had these desires at that age. This was what sold. This was the Freud that sold. What does that tell us about the age that Freud inhabited? What does that tell us about what we're told about the age that Freud inhabited? I think it tells us that we should ask questions about what we're told. We already should be doing that anyway, but it just doesn't add up, right? You would think, again, that someone like Freud would never have been able to have become as famous, and even though he was controversial, as beloved by many, and someone who was generally regarded as a genius. One would think that this whole notion this whole philosophy of sexualized children would not have sold at all in the Victorian age, but it did. Given the choice between hearing children are being sexually victimized habitually, endemically, or on the other hand, children are sexual and they want to have sex with adults, on the other hand, it seems the Victorian age opted largely, or the intended audience of Freud. Anyway, it's hard to completely categorize an entire age as having only one particular point of view or perspective. But Freud's patrons, the upper class, the ruling class, the people who ended up becoming his patients and so forth, including, as I understand it, some members of royalty and whatnot. They wanted to hear Freud Mach 2. Now, why is that? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but it's an interesting question. So thank you again, Dillard Q. Thurman, for igniting this thought for me, and interested to hear what anybody thinks. My name's Andy Nowicki. You can check out my work at altrightnovelist.com.